We will start with questions to the three panelists. If you have a question, please raise your voice, speak to the microphone because of Russian-English translation. If you don't have a microphone next to you, then please use any microphone on the desk. And please reserve with your comments at least some minutes while the questions are answered. I hope the procedure is clear enough. The comments are as was explained by Frana Marovic, is limited to 2 minutes. I open the floor for discussion. Yes, please, sir. Please, everyone, introduce yourself so that we understand who is raising the voice. Yes, go ahead.
Russian Peace Funds, Zavrutsky. I am an expert of the Human Rights Chamber of the Russian Federation and also a member of the UN Alliance. I have a question. I'd like to remind you that today we meet on the very same day as the Munich Security Conference, and the fact that these two important conferences take place at the same time means that we need to take a very serious approach to our issue, to the topic that we are discussing here. And that's why I think that the significance of our meeting goes far beyond of what was declared at the beginning, because we need to call a spade a spade. We need to acknowledge that we're in the middle of a propaganda war influenced by the digital revolution. So this is a new Potsdam, and that's why we need to think, we need to take a new approach about propaganda and propaganda war. This new era also requires a new philosophy in the era of a new Cold War. We are on the brink of it used to be that the world was on the brink of a nuclear disaster. Now it is enough to spread lies to be untouchable as a state. Television can spread all kinds of lies, can spread myths, and can threat with apocalypse. This is not propaganda anymore. This is inhuman, and we are the witness of this verbal abuse. And that's why it's not only propaganda, it's actually a trigger of a certain kind of apocalypse. And I want to really turn your attention to this dangerous development. Romain Rolland said that propaganda is an eternal process. It is an illusion to be able to prevent propaganda war. Our threat is looming too large today. Of course, we can always prevent propaganda or ban propaganda, for example, ban propaganda of a nuclear war in Great Britain, for example. There is something of that kind going on. And that's why I'd like to draw one conclusion. It is important to find reconciliation. And now maybe this is not imminent. I think this prophecies might come true, especially the prophecy of a nuclear war. And that's why we are confronted with very dangerous developments in this digital era. Thank you, Mr. Zawadzki, for this comment. Andrei Svirida from Kazakhstan. I come from the Office for Human Rights in Kazakhstan. And I think I wouldn't describe the situation in such global terms as the Russian colleague did. Can you hear me? But I would like to come back to what a colleague said about how dangerous it is when, under the pretext of combating propaganda of war, there is discrimination, and of course the national dignity is violated, and this is also a part of our criminal law. We also have Article 64 that bans the propaganda of aggressive war, and it is very important to distinguish between the propaganda of aggressive war and self-defense, and that's why I quoted from the criminal law. Propaganda of war and defining crimes against peace is justified. But if all kinds of other offenses are being added to this general offense, then this is ridiculous from the point of view of a lawyer. For example, if a blogger or a journalist is being prosecuted because he offended the nation, is this supposed to be propaganda of war? During the past year, 8 persons are waiting for their punishment under Article 24. The opposition periodical Adem was closed down in accordance with civil law provisions, not criminal law provisions, because it allegedly conducted propaganda of war. The word aggressive in the offense was lost for some reason. And for example, in Kiev, supporters wanted to found a volunteer battalion to participate in the anti-terrorist operation. This battalion was never established, but the Kazakhstani newspaper journal which reported about this was closed down nevertheless. We also have prisoners because they allegedly incited to inter-ethnic hatred. In December 2013, oil workers were shot. Mr. Kozlov was sentenced to prison. And also the Bozbekov case, Narumbayev case, 5 years of prison, 4 years of prison, 3 years of prison. All these sentences were handed down in accordance with this article. And at the trial, the accused demanded to know what they had done, and they did not get any adequate answers. So far, this article is called incitement to inter-ethnic hatred. And now the definition has been enhanced. Incitement is very difficult to define. And of course, the court was in agreement with everything. Expert opinions were not heard, and the accused had a prison sentence of 3 or 4 years. Thank you very much. I would like the moderator interrupts. Please remind the speaker of slowing down because it is not possible to interpret. Thank you, Mr. Sviridov. I would like to turn to all speakers to slow down. And I'd like to remind you to keep the speaker's limit of 2 minutes and slow down so that the interpreters will be able to interpret the entire statement. Question to the panelists. What is a crime against humanity, and is hate speech part of such propaganda? Who else wants to ask a question?
My name is Umut Topçuoğlu. I'm from the Turkish delegation. I don't have a question per se. I just have a brief comment on an intervention by one of our panelists, namely by Mr. Kearney. Mr. Kearney, if I heard you correctly in your statement, you said that the European Court of Human Rights didn't consider it a criminal act to deny the Holocaust, but did consider it a criminal act to deny the Holocaust, but didn't consider it criminal to deny the Armenian genocide. And you went on to say that this showed how hypocritical international bodies could be. Well, I think that especially in light of the subject matter of our conference, which is propaganda, this just shows how it's easy for, propaganda to slip into even the most serious discussions, because in my judgment, what you were doing there, whether, wittingly or unwittingly, was disseminating propaganda for unfounded genocide allegations. It's my opinion. I'm not going to offer our arguments on that issue, which are well known. I just wanted to, make a correction and say that the European Court of Human Rights, in the judgment which you were referring to, stated that the existence of a genocide, which was a precisely defined legal concept, was not easy to prove, and that the court doubted whether there could be a general consensus as to events such as those at issue, given that historical research was by definition open to discussion and a matter for debate. I just wanted to set that right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Andrzej Krajewski. I am from the Polish Council of National Broadcasting Council. And I'd like to say that considering propaganda, we recently noticed the rise of propaganda techniques in the Polish television. As you may know, there were changes in public media in Poland. All the managers were fired by the law and the new people came in. The council protested against this. And also there was I made an observation of the weak editions of the main news of Polish television, and unfortunately I found a number of propaganda techniques in it. The Programming Council of Polish Television made a statement pointing out to this dangerous factor, and the National Broadcasting Council will organize official monitoring of this news. On top of that, I would like to say that the Council also noted in the past number of instances of hate speech and punished broadcasters for allowing this kind of talk. It was especially cases of mocking because of color of skin, because of nationality. It dealt with Ukrainians, also calling to hatred when the rainbow symbol of gay rights was put on fire in Warsaw, and also mocking fun of clergy in stand-up comedians by public television. Also, there is general situation in Poland has been changing because of change of the government, and we are concerned also about the future of the private broadcasters, because we have strong private broadcasters in Poland. However, there are also ways to extend pressure on the private broadcasters, and just recently there was a news that one of the private broadcasters, who is also owner of the energy plant in Poland, is under investigation by Minister of Treasury. Obviously, it may have, I repeat, the influence on the independence of the news program. They have. It's being considered the most neutral, I would say, broadcaster among private broadcasters. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just have a question to...
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I'm Christian Mier from Reporters Without Borders in Germany, the director, and I have a question to Malus van Norloos. I was really interested, I share the view that propaganda can only be effective when governments control the media, and from a press freedom watchdog organization, Reporters Without Borders, we see this, talking about Russia, talking about China and other questions, but I have basically two questions to you. Do you see any examples from so-called democratic societies where propaganda has been effective, which would be somehow an exception confirming the rule, which somehow happens? And secondly, I was not clear if you referred with this observation you made that propaganda can only be effective when governments control the media. Do you only refer to war propaganda or to hatred speech? There, I just want to clarify. Thank you.
Okay, maybe we give the floor to the speakers to respond. Who would like to be the first? Michael?
I wasn't quite clear. Was there a question about hate speech and crimes against humanity?
Yeah. What is the correlation? Is it part of crimes against humanity, and if yes, why?
Okay. Okay. So this should be an easy question to ask because it's a technical question. When it comes to crimes against humanity, what we talk about with international crimes, we have 4 categories of crime. We have war crimes, which are violations generally committed between soldiers against civilians in a time of conflict. So that's not relevant to us now. We have genocide, which is the destruction of a group of people on identity grounds. And we have aggression, which basically relates to unlawful war. Crimes against humanity relate to, the definition is that it's a widespread or systematic attack on a civilian population. The international courts have been asking this question, whether hate speech is an element of a crime against humanity. Usually when you're prosecuting someone on a crime against humanity, you're prosecuting them for murder as a crime against humanity, torture as a crime against humanity. It's always a physical act, physical violence. There's an add-on crime of persecution, which basically you can't prosecute alone, but you can prosecute someone for murder as a crime against humanity, and then you can attach the crime of persecution to that murder on the basis that not only did you kill this person, but your motive, your intention in doing so was discriminatory, was persecutory. The Yugoslavia Tribunal, the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, within this add-on element, they're happy to accept that hate speech can constitute persecution as a crime against humanity. But whether hate speech in and of itself can constitute a crime against humanity is disputed. So right now, I don't think I can point to a precedent, to a case where a tribunal accepted this. Can you? No. But the way that propaganda and hate speech is becoming to be addressed more and more by the different tribunals and in different cases, it's something I would expect to see. I would expect to see this development. I would expect to see it happen pretty soon, actually. Again, the problem is the courts will all accept that hate speech is crucial in causing crimes, but because it's not a physical act, they're uncertain where to place it in legal thinking. So I'll leave that there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Marcus.
Thank you. I would first like to react to the story about some countries using war propaganda laws to actually target bloggers, to target all kinds of journalists who so-called offend the nation. This is exactly the problem that I was pointing to, indeed, that such laws can easily be misused, can be interpreted so broadly as to target your political opponents, and this can be a huge problem, not only in criminal law, indeed, but also in civil law, which can be quite repressive sometimes as well. So completely agree there. Also on the question about war propaganda versus hate propaganda, and indeed whether it can only be done when the state is completely in control. You're completely right to point to a distinction there. I think there is an important distinction. I think things like war propaganda, incitement to genocide, these kinds of expressions are of the kind where, it will mostly be one big state operation where these expressions come from, and they are systematic and they are very difficult to counter. When you speak about hate speech more in general, or propaganda for hatred, there are a lot of instances, unfortunately, from various countries in the world where hate speech, was issued not by state organs, but by individuals, by other organizations, and where it might have eventually an effect on the way these groups are viewed, negative imaging of racial groups, of religious groups. And there, I think individuals and non-state organizations can be very, effective in a negative way as well, unfortunately. So that there's an important difference there also in the way we try to counter these types of speech. Although I still think that even with the hate speech laws that protect minorities, you have to be mindful of abuse by state organs of these laws.
I have a question to all three panelists, and the question relates to the problem which was described by, I think, all three of you, is a definitional problem. And you described how courts, national courts, struggled with cases of propaganda for war because of vague definitions. So my question is, are definitions really so problematic? Is it hard to define what is propaganda, what is war, what is hatred, what is incitement, or it's impossible to define those terms? And what international organizations and international dialogue, to which I believe Michael appealed, and also you, Marlos, how it can assist in such case? I mean, how can international organizations help with the definitional problems?
Yes, I definitely think it can be done. You can make a good attempt to define it in law. And I think what should be done then is to look at best practices from around the world to see which countries have good, clear laws in these fields with clear definitions which do not target a too broad range of speech. For instance, with requirements like imminent danger or things like that, clear intention requirements. Especially in the field of war and with terrorism, for instance, we do see it extremely difficult to come to shared definitions, and this also has an impact on the way national courts are now dealing with these laws on terrorism, for instance. So there, I don't think it's impossible, but at the moment, you see lots of problems because these definitions are not uniform. And there are so many different views about it, about liberation wars and things like that, that it will be a very difficult operation in that field, in the field of terrorism, in the field of, a prohibited war, to come to a shared agreement.
Michael?
Yeah, I agree completely. We can come to reasonable definitions and interpretations of all of these terms and these expressions if there's the political will there for it. the study of law, the operation of law, it's all based on interpretation and definition of terms and concepts at every level. So there's no reason that one particular expression or one particular word should stand out and say, well, we simply can't define this one. I mean, we do have to take into account that, you know, there's a quite rational and reasonable reason why states have refused or opposed coming to a consensus on the definition of terms like propaganda, war and terrorism, and that's basically that states and governments perceive war and terrorism quite correctly as being like very serious threats to their ability to protect themselves and to protect their people. So if I'm being generous, so they need the freedom to act, and they need some scope. They don't want international law or international oversight to unduly place restrictions on them in the face of threats. So we have, when it comes to the use of force in the UN Charter, okay, again, what's interesting is when we talk about propaganda for war, this is really one of the only examples in the whole sphere of international law where the word war is actually used. So with the UN Charter, they talk about the use of force. We talk about armed attack. In international criminal law, we talk about aggression. In international humanitarian law, we talk about armed conflict. So we have, again, I'm going back to this idea of that international law is fragmented into very different strands, and we struggle across each of these strands, there's dispute and a lack of consensus about all these different terms that we use for war. How to resolve that? Again, I think I mentioned it in my initial presentation, but it is going to be initiatives like this report and like this meeting today. I think that it's going to be academics, activists, journalists, politicians, and it has to be at an overarching international level that we continue these discussions. But again, just to stress that it is beyond propaganda for war. It is how we treat war in broader international relations.
Thank you, Michael. Wolfgang?
Yeah, very shortly. I think there is a need to work towards a common understanding of these concepts. And regional organizations have a role in this. When it comes to the Council of Europe, it's a bit easier because there we have the European Court for Human Rights, which can set a common standard for national courts. So give this orientation. When it comes to the OSCE, additional efforts might be necessary to look at, it was said, at good practices, good laws also, and to give orientation. And this can be done, for example, through recommendations, through resolutions, which give orientation also for the courts and for national practice in general. The European Court of Human Rights from time to time refers to recommendations of the Committee of Ministers because this is setting a certain understanding of concepts. And in this way, I think also here, in this context, more could be done in this respect. But as it rightly was said, it's not just a matter of the courts and applying the law, it's also a matter of giving orientation to the media and to the public in general. What is happening at the moment in the internet, in social networks, regarding defamation, hate speech, and incitement to all kinds of things, cannot only be addressed by legal means or by courts, but needs to be addressed by literacy, by education, by getting a common understanding. And this is a daily work. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. If I may put more pressure on Michael, I mean, I understood your reply as basically saying that war is a kind of old-fashioned notion, not very often used in the law, probably 19th century notion. And especially in this regard, and in the context of what we do here, will you consider that propaganda for war includes propaganda for information war, or propaganda for hybrid war, these new terms and which are widely used? And if please explain why yes or why no.
Can I just ask for a clarification, because I'm not familiar with the term hybrid war? Do you mean an internationalized, non-international armed conflict?
Hybrid, exactly.
Okay. Okay, so just the background to this is that when the Geneva Conventions were drafted after the Second World War, there was felt to be a need that as you mentioned, that the concept of war, as in states declaring war, was obsolete. Okay, that the experience of the manner by which the Second World War broke out meant that the understanding of war, the definition of war, as understood, was just no longer relevant. So they attempted to come up with this concept of armed conflict that would be a bit more scientific, that by reference to objective factors such as the intensity of a conflict, which parties were participating in a conflict, that would give us better guidance as to whether there was a state of war or not. You know, this I mentioned the Second World War, but also a very strong factor in replacing the concept of war was what we call the Spanish Civil War. Okay. Which we call a civil war, but Germany and Italy were fully and actively involved in fighting the Spanish government at that time. When we look at the situation in a conflict like Syria today, us as international lawyers we should be quite embarrassed, because it's very difficult for us to tell the public, if we're asked, what type of war is it? How do you describe the conflict? Is it a civil war? Is it an international war? Is Britain at war with Syria? Okay, I'm living in Britain. Before Christmas, the Prime Minister advocated for military strikes in Syria. I don't know. I can't tell by reference to the scientific criteria we have whether that means we're at war or not. Similarly with France, I'm not sure if France is at war with Syria or in Syria. So these definitional problems around war probably need to be resolved even before we start engaging with the definition. I think the definition of propaganda won't be quite so difficult in the face of the definitional problems around what constitutes war. And I think there's no political appetite to resolve that conundrum at the moment.
How can we raise this appetite?
Hand over.
Okay. I see 4 questions already. 5. Good. I saw Boris first because he's probably in the left corner. Please, Boris.
Thank you, Boris Navasaryan, Yerevan Press Club. My question is about liability for propaganda. Whether the size of the audience matters in that case. For instance, should we have the same criteria for liability for a blogger and for a, let's say, global TV company? And also whether language and national barriers matter here, whether the propaganda is distributed just in one country or if it is distributed internationally.
Okay, we'll take several questions if you don't mind. Rubina, I saw you because you were sitting next to Boris.
Yes, I mean, we are speaking a lot on juridical questions on propaganda and hatred. And there was spoken a bit on the responsibility of journalists or media. I would come back to the responsibility of politicians as well, you know. If you take the media, and if you take the media doing propaganda reporting, let's say, so of course sometimes or quite often, they have to follow the politicians because there's one press conference after the other, one minister is giving a press conference after the other, so they are telling you the truth or not the truth, I don't know, and they have to report on it. Even it's not true, you know, even it is propaganda. They just have to report on it, and that's a problem. And they can't correct it, they're not allowed to correct it. So on the other hand, so especially in times, I mean, we are speaking on war, while I think Cold War is a part of war as well. I don't know, but I think so. Maybe it's naive to think in this way. Anyhow, I do. So especially in times of Cold War as well, so issues are abused for political reasons. Let's take, for instance, a young girl disappeared in another country because she wanted to see her boyfriend, and a foreign minister made it to a issue to discuss it with his colleague of this country where the girl disappeared. And the mass media in the country of the girl, they were crying, well, where is our girl, etc., etc., in a very difficult political situation between the two countries. So then it came out, she just left for a couple of days. And as a lot of young girls, I did it as well when I was young, because sometimes it's quite boring to be together with the parents. And it wasn't at all a political issue, but it was treated as a political issue. So it shouldn't be as well worked out, not only some codices for the media, as it's done, but also for politicians. Is it possible?
Thank you. Sir? Yeah. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Marcel van Herpen of the Cicero Foundation in the Netherlands. I have a question to Wolfgang Benedek. Well, he had a very interesting introduction. You said what is very important was to establish fact-finding missions. And I agree with that, it's very important. There's only one problem, these are the political fights. I'm from the Netherlands. We had in more than 1.5 years ago the downing of the MH17 above Ukraine, above the Donbass region, in which many Dutch were dead. And the Dutch government wanted an independent fact-finding mission by the United Nations Security Council. Well, this was blocked by one of the members of the council. And the Dutch, they had their own fact-finding mission that came with results, and this mission was, I think, very precise. And the results were attacked by one of the members of the Security Council. So I think it's always a problem that fact-finding missions are ending in political fights. So that's my question.
Thank you. Please, Yuri, introduce yourself.
Приветствую всех. My name is Yuri Lukhanov. I'm the chairman of Independent Union of Journalists of Ukraine. I would like to ask a question to the speakers and make a comment. First and foremost, I would like to say the following. There was a term that has been used, namely hybrid war. Often it is stated that a hybrid war has been waged against Ukraine. Therefore, when certain calls are made, official calls, and it is difficult to qualify them as stirring up hatred or unleashing war. However, a call for historic justice brought about a violation of international law. A part of Ukrainian territory has been annexed. I'm talking about Crimea in this particular case. For example, when calls are made to create a Donetsk People's Republic or Lugansk People's Republic, these calls, in fact, have helped to unleash war in the eastern part of Ukraine. Do you believe that such calls can be qualified as incitement of war and hatred? And second comment I would like to state. We have been provided with information stating that journalists are thrown behind bars for spreading false information, and they have been punished by imprisonment. Perhaps this is absolutely wrong that such laws exist, and we have to counter such laws. We have to try to mobilize the journalists community. They have to try to lobby their interests, and they have to put forward certain alternatives. On the other hand, mass protests have to be staged. There was an attempt in 2010 that was undertaken by Yanukovych to adopt a law on the criminal persecution of journalists. However, several hundred of Ukrainian journalists have taken to the streets, they have approached the building of the parliament, and they convinced the government to reject these plans.
Ahmad Shaidov, I'm from Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. I have short comments and two questions to OSCE representative of freedom of media. First of all, I want to thank OSCE representative for this effective non-paper, because I'm agreed that we need to facilitate the OSCE participating states in formulating national and international law and policy toward the spread of war propaganda, because an international community is hampered by the lack of clear definition of content of wars. So my first question is about media self-regulation. Ms. Dunya Miatovic mentioned about it and said that the local medias are ruled by governors, and it take these conflicted sides. I think this is normal that each side has their own truths and tries to show the international community it. But what about the worldwide international organization and the war propaganda? I want to mention last report of Freedom House organization, Freedom in the World 2016, where the Freedom House shows and tries to show Nagorno-Karabakh as independent country and compare these Nagorno-Karabakh with Armenia and with Azerbaijan, and whom we need to accuse for this report, which powers, which countries. This is my first question. And about the second question, you mentioned about the international standards and said that we need to apply international standards of United Nations, Council of Europe, European Union, and etc. World-known Organization on Freedom of Media to decrease war propaganda. I'm interested if these international standards should be effective, because if we look to near history, UN has 4 resolutions on immediately releasing of occupied territories, but no results yet. How the international standards of United Nations, European Council, European Union will be effective if we hadn't seen the results? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ashot, пожалуйста.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank our experts. I believe that their reports have been very interesting and wonderful. I would like to ask a question to Ruslan Carlos. She has mentioned that propaganda usually is spread by state media. However, I would like to mention another problem, which is related to the private media. I remember the first Gulf War when Rupert Murdoch, in one of his statements, said that the Gulf War has to be initiated. I'm talking about the first Gulf War. However, I'm expressing my personal opinion. This is what he said in an interview to a newspaper. He was under control, or he had control over 167 media outlets. Then all media outlets started spreading the idea that the war in the Gulf is necessary. And the question is, what do we do in this particular situation? Because the propaganda is not spread by state-run media. We're talking about a single individual who has been spreading this information, voicing his opinion.
Gentleman from UK delegation. Sir.
Firstly, let me thank you all for this conference. I found it very, very interesting so far. I'd just like to make some brief comments in response to Michael Kearney. Mr. Kearney stated that in the case of Regina versus Mohammed Gul, the UK's Supreme Court agrees that there was no definition of terrorism in UK law. I would like to remind all colleagues that terrorism is clearly defined in UK law under Part 1 of the Terrorism Act from the year 2000. In light of this, and following on from what many colleagues have said this morning, we are supportive of efforts to reach an international agreement on the definition of terrorism. I think you're right to say that the negotiations on the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism have stalled, in parts of questions related to definitions. But there are 13 sectoral terrorism conventions that we are fully signed up to and are implementing in the UK. There is also the important Council of Europe Convention on Terrorism, which we're fully signed up to. Finally, you made some brief comments that the prosecutions in the UK are political. I'd just like to say that prosecutions for terrorism, to say that they're political is entirely untrue, and the UK system ensures that prosecutions are at arm's length from the executive branch of government. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Коллеги, здравствуйте. Максим Додонов.
Maxim Dadonov, TV channel Zvezda. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we have gathered here in order to build bridges. However, we are trying to avoid touching upon delicate issues. At the same time, we're not delving into details. However, we have touched upon the system that would help us to craft necessary methods. We have stopped short of making a decisive step towards creating one single structure that would put forward resolutions that would have the same weight as the resolutions published by the Security Council. If we look at our colleagues at the United Nations, we can say that not all resolutions are influential. We can mention Julian Assange as an example. I had an honor to meet him, and I've made a movie about him. Unfortunately, the Swedish and British side failed to accept this recommendation as a call for action. We have been talking about definition of war and propaganda. At the same time, we're trying to circumvent political differences and erroneous statements which have been stated by our colleagues, the journalists, as well as the politicians. I believe we should not avoid touching upon these issues. We're here in the heart of Europe. We are talking about freedom of expression. However, at the same time, we fail to understand, in fact, we forget that European journalism has been mired in dirt to such an extent it's very, very difficult for them to wash themselves of it. Our colleagues sometimes try to avoid discussing delicate issues. For example, our colleagues from BBC, the channel has shown a movie about World War III, and the question is why they published such a movie. In fact, this is a documentary. However, it states that Russia has invaded Latvia, and therefore we have a legitimate question. What other steps are being discussed by former diplomats and other political figures? World War III is a serious matter. Just think about millions who have died as a result of bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and as a result of the Second World War on the Eastern Front. In fact, this matter relates to politicians, and I believe we should take tough measures in order to put an end to any attempt to sow differences. Hillary Clinton has mentioned that Russia tries to change borders in Europe. However, why such statements are being made? In fact, such statements are being made in order to exercise political pressure on Russia, as well as economic pressure, as well as to wipe up military influence on the part of United States. They are thinking about stationing anti-aircraft defense system in southern Korea. And the question is, what would be potential consequences thereof? General Secretary of NATO, Mr. Stoltenberg, also made statements to that effect. He has mentioned that Russia has been conducting military exercises near Sweden, simulating nuclear strike against the country. Perhaps this is his own personal opinion. John Kerry has mentioned that Russia is carrying out inhumane war in Syria, killing women and children. However, we have yet to see evidence of it. What we see is the Afghan city of Kunduz, and we have seen that there were victims who emerged as a result of military operation in that city. There are a lot of issues have come up in relation to our Russian colleagues. Ivan Blagov, for example, has been working for the First Channel, and the prosecutor's office in Berlin has initiated a case against my colleague. I believe that this is a direct an attempt to exercise direct pressure on the media. I would like to mention in conclusion that OSCE plays an important role here, and I'm very happy with the fact that we have gathered here to speak about the issue. Now, I would like to express my gratitude to all the colleagues, and especially to Dunia Mijatovic, because what we are doing here is trying to draw attention to the cases of infringement of journalists' rights when crossing borders, especially in the case of Turkey. We're discussing incidents whereby Lithuania stops or bans the broadcasting of Russian channels on its territory, or Moldova is introducing a ban on the entry of Russian journalists. However, the situation continues to exacerbate, therefore we cannot avoid but mention those delicate questions regardless of how one defines information war.
Докладчиком и начинаю с Фолькингом. I'm sorry. Fine?
I'm sorry to take the floor again. Just in response to the distinguished member of Zvezda, I'd just like to say that the UK is currently working with EU and international partners to counter the effects of Russian disinformation activity. Her Majesty's government has a strong commitment to free media. The BBC's editorial independence is one of the greatest strengths, enabling it to provide impartial information and to produce unrivaled quality content. And with regards to the World War III documentary that the colleague just mentioned, it was very interesting and it highlighted particular participating states' hybrid warfare. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. As I have to leave a bit early, I just wanted to respond to those questions where I was a bit addressed. Our colleague from the Netherlands, I think the fact that the Netherlands was indeed using the instrument of a fact-finding mission shows that this is a valuable possibility. But you are totally right in pointing out also the shortcomings. I mean that if you cannot establish such a commission in agreement with all the parties concerned, then you risk that it is not recognized by one or the other party. And sometimes there's no other way than to do it without that party. But there is always a public which can read and inform itself from such reports. And I think this is also an important function of these reports. Regarding the question, does it matter what is the public of hate speech? I wanted to give the example of the Austrian law and the amendments which we had this year. And here it says clearly that if many people are addressed or informed by this hate speech, and this is interpreted at around 30 now, this is a cause for persecution of that hate speech. In the past, we talked about the broad public, and this was considered to be 100 people. So you see the judges can go into quite some detail in interpreting this, but the tendency is that we do not need a very broad public, but also a smaller public is sufficient in order to have this concept of hate speech found. And regarding the question whether it makes a difference, whether this is cross-border or not, in the Austrian law, this does not make a difference, I would say. Yeah? It does not mention the issue of cross-border, but the problem is indeed there, because sometimes it's easier to have hate speech across borders than inside the country. And here I think the authorities also have to be vigilant to prevent this, because that it would go against international peace and stability, which is to be protected by the provisions against hate speech as well. And I leave the other issues to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Carlos?
Yes, first to come back to the question about the responsibility of politicians. I completely agree. It's very important to go into that as well. And in many countries, including my own, parliamentarians, for instance, can also be held criminally responsible for things like hate speech. Not for war propaganda, because we don't have this law, but we do have a hate speech law. There's a lot of discussion about whether the right-wing politician Geert Wilders should have been prosecuted the last time. He was prosecuted and acquitted. Now he's prosecuted again. Anyway, it is possible. There is a law that makes it possible, and the European Court of Human Rights also is quite clear that politicians, on the one hand, have a large freedom of expression because they have to engage in public debate, and on the other hand, they have a special responsibility because they have so much influence and such a big audience. They have a responsibility not to incite to hatred. So yes, they can be held responsible there as well. But what is even more important, perhaps, is that many politicians should be leading by example in this issue as regards incitement, that they set the right example of having good discussions about these issues, and that they don't use their influence to influence the media to do what they want. Leading by example is the most important thing, and if it's really necessary and it goes really far, then criminal sanctions are possible as well. Then another thing about propaganda by private media. Indeed, as I said, my point was rather to make clear that propaganda for war and hatred is especially serious when it comes from state organs and state media, because then it's most difficult to put counter voices against them. So the possibility for a debate, a marketplace of ideas is reduced. So then prohibitions may be most necessary, although they are also most difficult to effectuate, of course, but that's not to say that when propaganda comes from private media, and sometimes it does, that it's not important to act. But I do still think that in many cases where private media are involved, like Murdoch's papers, for instance, that they may have a lot of power, but still the room for counter voices may be just still a bit more than when it really comes from the state and all its power. But yeah, it can be very problematic, especially if certain private media outlets have a lot of power and almost like monopolies in a certain country. That is very serious, and therefore I think the approach in the non-paper towards pluralism, towards more voices, is the first thing that we should think about before thinking about prohibitions.
Many thanks. Michael?
Yeah, just briefly, I think my colleagues have covered most of the questions. There was, the gentleman from Ukraine. I think you asked about whether incitement to war internally, secession, was unlawful. I mean, it's there in the legislation of every country that rebellion against the legitimate government is going to be a crime in domestic law. Whether you can consider it, it's a little more tricky then to answer whether it could constitute a crime at the international legal level. Sorry, the lady from Reporters Without Borders. Again, you know, at the very outset this morning, it was said that we weren't going to be discussing specific cases. But since I arrived in Vienna yesterday, a few people have mentioned this looter case. So it was obviously a big deal here, where it really, I don't think it was a big deal, let's say, in Britain over the past few weeks. And it seems to me that what we're talking about in this case is, you know, kind of mudslinging between, you know, it's diplomatic. It's a public form of diplomacy. It doesn't appear to be rising to the level of provocation of violence or provocation of war. It seems to me that it's insults and it's countries irritating each other. So I might be wrong because I'm not familiar with the context.
It's another war, isn't it?
Okay, but it's not a war involving tanks and guns and so on. So I just, sorry, I'm going to just say the gentleman from Turkey earlier and from the UK there, like I appreciate your responses to my paper, but I don't think if I start discussing these issues any further with you, it'll just detract from the focus on propaganda.
Would you like to make comments now?
Yes. Not as a chairmanship, but if I understand correctly, a lot of or several speakers now alluded to a Lisa case in Berlin. Also, the colleague from Siesta who called rightly so for becoming concrete. I would like to become a little bit more concrete, although it is not German practice to talk about the problems of a 13-year-old girl, which are totally her personal problems and maybe the problems of her parents. Why it is relevant and not only a diplomatic sort of exchange between two foreign ministers, which we should not discuss here, is that the allegation was that there has been misuse by migrants, which led to quite serious demonstrations of a certain group of Germans, recipients of Russian-speaking television, against the migrant policy of the federal government. So, of course, it is the right of everyone in Germany to have his or her opinion on the migrant policy. It is also their right to go and protest. But of course, the subtext of this was an anti-migrant subtext. And that is what we really found dangerous, and why this case is something that fits into the subject and the theme of today's meeting, which is also propaganda, not only for war, but also for hatred. Now, let's not discuss rights of personality of a 13-year-old girl who obviously had problems. Let's not discuss whether all the facts have been thoroughly investigated when the media subjects were brought up, especially as the acts and deeds of German law enforcement, police and prosecutors were concerned. I think this is not the subject here now, but the other is very relevant to us and in a situation which is not easy for a lot of societies here in the OSCE region in connection with the issues of migrants and migration. This is certainly something that did not contribute to a positive discussion or to a realistic, pragmatic discussion of an issue, but which contributed to emotions on the basis of false facts. Therefore, I think it is a topic for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for your clarification. We don't have much time, although the discussion has just reached its momentum. I have identified three persons willing to speak, two here and one there. So let me start with you, please.
After lunch, maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to briefly comment on one comment here from the back on Syria, because there was questioned somehow the evidence for killings by Russian army in Syria. And I just want to I think we have to answer with facts, that there are facts to be seen, for example, by the independent media centers, citizen journalists who are well known for the verification procedure and for clarifying facts. And I think there are obvious facts documented and proved that civilians as well as journalists have been killed by Russian journalists, such as by Russian army in Syria. I think one just has to say that, as to state that, to answer.
Эти факты никто не видел. Извините, пожалуйста.
Nobody has seen these facts. These are not facts.
a second thing, and the second thing is I just want to refer on the case of Ivan Blagoy as well, because I want to answer with some facts as well, because it's always better to answer with facts and not with just theories. I think, of course, it would be critical if there would be criminal persecution of a journalist such as Ivan Blagoy, but I think his way of doing journalism was really unethical in some way, was bad journalism. In his report, I don't know if who of you he actually saw his report. The report actually was lacking actually journalistic professional standards. He wasn't mentioning the police as a source, first of all. Secondly, he was introducing a footage which has been quite old without labeling where this footage came from. I think that's another fact. And I think talking about the impact of the whole thing, I think if you saw, and from time to time I see Russian media, if you're talking about the impact that so many Russian Germans in Germany would be in uproar, I think that's totally not true. And there are facts as well. There was a recent study from 2013 by the German Migration Authority on the media usage of Russian Germans in Russian. It has been quite interesting, and more than 60% in Germany of Russian Germans in Germany, they consume German media, and I think this is an interesting fact. And another fact that in this demonstration, which have been portrayed in German in Russian media, there have been 10,000 people which have been mobilized. Yes, that's a fact. But if you take the number that in Germany we have approximately 3 million Russian Germans, that's really nothing. I just want to make this point clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Helena?
Thank you. I come from the Communications Regulatory Agency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm head of broadcasting there, and I'm also a member of the board of the European Platform of Regulatory Authorities, which is a forum that gathers together all European regulatory authorities in the field of broadcasting. And this year, when drafting the work plan for this year, we decided to have a working group at our 2 meetings, which is dedicated to the regulatory response at the media in times of crisis. The spring session is going to deal with the media service providers in times of crisis, but the autumn session is something which is more important for our work, how the regulators respond to the times of crisis. And from my personal experience, which Dunja can share, I believe it is really difficult. When we were first established in 1998, we were quite strict, and I'm sure that some of our decisions that we took at the time wouldn't wouldn't stand the test of Strasbourg court. And in time, of course, as the situation in the country was, we thought, improving, we kind of relaxed a little our approach to the situation. But at the same time, the hate speech, the propaganda, the all various forms of speech which is not welcomed anywhere, they transformed, they totally changed their original appearance. So now we are dealing with much more elaborate and much more dangerous cases of let me say again, unwelcome forms of speech, not to label it. And I'm also very, it is always on my mind, the question that you raised, this difference where media, of course, it's quite easy to react when media foster hate. I mean, that's clear to see. But how to respond to media when they have to just to report on political statements that foster hate and fear and all negative feelings. But what I think is, now this is my personal opinion, I mean, the media, of course, have to report, and they cannot always, ask different questions but I think that more serious media should also engage in organizing debates and fostering debates about these dangerous political statements. And in that case, they could foster the issue of media literacy that Professor Benedek mentioned, that they should really, they could and should somehow inspire people to critically think about the entire situation, to ask various questions, not just to buy information, not to get them as they come. Thank you.
Thank you. Господин Салуцкий, второй раз, пожалуйста.
Mr. Salutsky, you have the floor. I'll be brief. I would like to respond to the statement that has been voiced by our colleague from Britain about the documentary on World War III. Unfortunately, this movie has not drawn significant attention as opposed to other separate incidents, and I'm dissatisfied by the fact that no one has condemned this movie in strongest terms. I believe that this documentary is going to affect the development of the European community, to be more specific. Since I represent civil society in Russia, I would like for my colleague to forward the following information to BBC employees, because I represent the opinion that is widespread in Russia. For example, if tomorrow you hold referendum in Latvia and 100% of the citizens of that country decide to become part of Russia, Russia would have never accepted the inclusion of Latvia into Russian Federation. And please believe me, this is the case. Eastern Ukraine is more than enough for us. I would like to kindly ask you to come back to the legal issues. Of course, I just made a joke. However, thank you very much. I've expressed my opinion. I believe that this documentary is going to play an important role, and we have to continue speaking about it. Thank you very much.
My name is Anton Volsky, and I represent here the Channel 1. And I want to say a couple of words regarding the Lisa story and my colleague Ivan Blagoy. First of all, I think that the story has been done professionally, and regarding the police comment on that, on Saturday when the story was on air, the police wasn't available for the comment, and the correspondent, the reporter, told that the police is not available, wasn't available for comment. Next day, when the police comments appeared on wires, we gave him right away. Secondly, I think there is a part of this whole story is lost in translation, because in the Russian original version, there was no words of migrants. There were words about the certain heritage, that those people were a certain heritage. So there were no comments that they were migrants from Turkey or whatever. And the correspondent reported this story saying that we cannot prove this or disprove because we have only comments from relatives.
Sorry to interrupt you, but
yes.
I tried to make a point at the beginning that we are not here to discuss or analyze individual particular cases, and I would like
oh, yeah,
to,
if you have a comment on that, so I just wanted to reply on that.
So if you have a point, if you can use the example to make a point. Thank you very much.
Sure, thanks. The point is, should the media not report on the issue, being afraid of whatever circumstances may happen? Because, for example, when the world media wasn't reporting on, for example, Vienna case when there was an Iraqi heritage man, as you would like, or Iraqi migrant who raped a boy in a Vienna pool. It was in December, I believe, but the world media reported on that only in January. So should the media then to silence itself and not to report on certain issues wouldn't be considered as an anti-propaganda or counter-propaganda?
Thank you. That takes us almost smoothly into the second session that will start after the lunch. But before that, I would like to give 30 seconds to each of the two panelists for final comments, if you have any. Let me request the audience to give a round of applause to the panelists who are here. And enjoy our lunch. Thank you.
And please be back at 1 o'clock.